In a somewhat recent King James debate with James White, probably the biggest point that White's King James-only opponent scored was a powerful question he asked. Something like, is there one verse in the Greek New Testament that you would not change based on new evidence? It was a brilliant and, I actually think, fair way to lay bare the biggest objection King James-onlyists have to the mainstream evangelical viewpoint on New Testament and Old Testament textual criticism, a viewpoint I hold. King James-onlyists want a stable, unchanging, perfect text. And I actually think I want to extend that line of questioning a little bit and even agree with it a little bit before I push back against it a little bit. That's this video. Agreement, then disagreement. 3 questions, then 3 answers. Indeed, I myself have had a question similar to that of the King James-onlyist in the White debate. Will New Testament textual criticism ever stop? If we don't have the originals, by what means can anyone say, we're done? We're done editing printed editions of the Greek New Testament now. This work is no longer fruitful or necessary. Are we not condemned to watch New Testament textual criticism track with the latest ideas that happen to be persuasive in the academy? I could possibly call these ideas fads, even though that's a little more dismissive a word than I'd like. The ideas that gain power in the field of New Testament textual criticism are, I'd say, more serious and powerful than slap raps, Furbies, and fidget spinners. They also last longer, but it seems to me, like fads, they don't last forever. Witness the fate of text types. Will even the coherence-based genealogical method, the CBGM, one day go the way of all fads? And another question, isn't it valid to be concerned that so many liberals are involved prominently in New Testament textual criticism? I think it is valid. You might be surprised to hear me say this, and I do have reasons why I'm not ultimately concerned. I'll get to them in this video. But I think King James-onlyists and those who prefer the Textus Receptus are most certainly not irrational to be suspicious of unbelievers touching our New Testament text. Another question, a third, is the work of New Testament textual criticism really worth doing, at least for evangelicals? It is empirically upsetting a lot of sheep. Should it stop for that pragmatic reason alone? I think these are 3 questions that evangelical New Testament textual critics and Old Testament ones need to wrestle with. The ones I know the best, they do seem to me to have a deep heart for the church. I think they have wrestled with these and many other questions. And let me turn now to answering my own questions, and not so incidentally those of the King James-onlyist in the White debate. I'm not really interacting with this individual, I just think he put a fine point on a question that many others have asked in various ways. I'll actually go in reverse order through my 3 questions. Third question, is New Testament textual criticism worth doing when it alarms so many Christians? I once taught New Testament textual criticism in Sunday school in the little church where I was an assistant pastor, and the idea that there are differences among Greek New Testament manuscripts did alarm at least one man in the class. But it's not textual criticism that alarmed him per se, it's the situation that New Testament textual criticism faces, the situation it's trying to solve, at least to the measure that solutions are possible. I don't want to dismiss out of hand the concern people have to get an unchanging Bible. I used to dismiss that concern, I did, until I ran across a high-ranking evangelical Christian professor of history or science or something, who complained on Facebook when he noticed that his pastor's more recent copy of the ESV made a small change in a verse that he'd memorized. This alarmed and upset him enough for him to publicly consider going back to the NASB, 1995, I think it was. Now, I think this intelligent Christian man is wrong. In a world that's just a little more ideal than ours, Christian people would all recognize that there are good reasons for Bible translations to differ a little here and there, and good reasons for them to change here and there over time. One of those reasons is language change. Another is advancements in New Testament textual criticism. Whether or not we can justifiably call them advancements, I will discuss in the last point of this video. But the ideal world is not the world we live in. We live in a world where a lot of otherwise wonderful Christian people don't understand Bible translation, and where they face some real misinformation. For example, Del Johnson, who was then speaking on behalf of a prominent King James-only college whose name rhymes with a popular soft drink, said this: "Textual criticism is an approach to Bible study, and it will result in the corruption of God's Word, and we will handle God's Word deceitfully," in other words, if we use textual criticism. "This leavening method of textual criticism was accepted and used by theological liberals, and it is, even to this day, applied in 2 ways. First, it's applied, first of all, toward the text of the Bible as it was written in the Hebrew and in the Greek. And as you accept this method, you have a choice in approaching the text of the Bible. You can approach it one of 2 ways. You can either accept the text, you can believe it and obey it, or you can doubt it and you can criticize it. Now, if you doubt it and criticize it, then you will develop a critical text. This is a mass of confusion and misinformation. When so many Christian people hear that textual criticism means criticizing the Bible rather than accepting it, no wonder they're alarmed. All I know to do is combat the misinformation. God could have given us a situation in which the perfect text of the Greek New Testament was perfectly clear. He could have made it so that not a single manuscript that came down to us from history was even one jot or one tittle different from any other. He could have told us to look for a manuscript of the Greek New Testament that glows with a yellow light, but he didn't do any of these things. Instead, he left us with a bunch of copies from different places and different centuries, pretty well all of which contain minor variations from one another. As a result, major Bible translations around the world have minor textual differences. The one I often cite, some major Bibles say that the wise men came and found baby Jesus. Others say that they came and saw him. And I think Christian people need to know this. I'm taking my own Sunday school class through the Scribes Scripture video series from Peter Gurry and John Mead for precisely this reason. Instead of stopping alarm over New Testament textual criticism by stopping the work on it, I think we should stop that alarm by education. It's the only way, given our God-given situation. I think all Christians should be told something about New Testament textual criticism and the reason for its existence. I'd love to see my King James Parallel Bible, which will soon enough be in print, become a standard tool that pastors use to teach textual criticism. Second question, why am I not concerned that liberals and Roman Catholics and others who don't share my belief in the biblical gospel are touching the text of the Greek New Testament over in some undisclosed location in Germany? It's because of a few factors. For one thing, the work of New Testament textual critics is almost obsessively focused on cataloging textual information and making it available to the whole world. No one's hiding anything. The whole point is to make the evidence available in a convenient way. Quite a few people whose doctrine, or total lack of Christian doctrine, I disagree with, have given their prodigious intelligence and years of their lives to incredibly detailed and demanding work with Greek New Testament manuscripts. Their work is available to see for free at the New Testament Virtual Manuscript Room, in the apparatus to the Nestle-Aland 28th edition, in textual commentaries, and in many other places. Another factor that will explain why the presence of liberals on the Nestle-Aland committee is not alarming to me, I'm not aware of a single evangelical English Bible translation that adopts all the textual decisions of the NA28 or the SBL-GNT or any critical edition of the Greek New Testament. They don't accept any conjectural emendations either, as far as I know. Translators do their own New Testament textual criticism. They're not beholden to the liberals. So the idea that liberals are monkeying with the Bibles in our evangelical laps is just false. It just doesn't work that way. I can't say that ideas from liberals play no role in evangelical approaches to New Testament textual criticism, but another factor, an even more important one in my lack of worry, the fact is that New Testament textual critics to this date are effectively always picking among available readings and not inventing them. Even liberals very seldom get to make conjectural emendations that make it into any printed editions of the Greek New Testament. In a big way, I value God's work of preservation more than my King James only brothers do because I want to know every reading he has preserved, not just the ones that happen to land in my favorite English Bible translation. Most of the most educated and capable Textus Receptus defenders out there admit that TR editions differ. They insist, however, that the original reading is found somewhere among the different TRs. How different is that view really from my view, that the right reading is found somewhere either in the text or in the textual apparatus of the NA28? We both limit the number of possible readings. I just have a bigger pool. That pool is not full of crazy stuff either. The vast majority of variants in the Greek New Testament manuscript tradition are incredibly boring and meaningless. And if liberals want to give their time to faithfully copying boring and meaningless variations alongside, yes, some interesting and meaningful variation on rare occasions, I'd say, I'm just grateful to them, no matter what their views on doctrine are. Finally, I reach my initial question. When will New Testament textual criticism ever stop? Is even a single verse in the New Testament inviolable, immune to the possibility that some textual critic out there will persuade other ones to let him change the Nestle-Aland 77th edition? The King James onlyist in the debate stopped the show with that question. I got to hand it to him. I have a few answers, however. The most important is another question. What's the alternative that the King James onlyist who debated James White might offer? Okay, so I can see why it's initially disturbing to hear White say that there's not a single verse of the New Testament that he can say a priori, before the facts come in, that he would not change based on sufficient evidence. But let's back up a little and look at the big picture. There are thousands of Greek New Testament manuscripts, pretty well all of which differ at least a little here and there. There are many dozens of printed editions of the Greek New Testament, and there are differences among them too. The Nestle-Lalande 28th edition is the most prominent and respected printed edition of the Greek New Testament. It does go through changes from edition to edition. Let's take it as our basis right now, just as a thought experiment. Consider all its jots and all its tittles, all its spaces and punctuation, all its words in order. There are only three alternatives available. We could declare that all verses in the NA28 are subject to change based on future textual finds or theories. We could declare that some verses are subject to change and some are not. Or we could declare that no verses are subject to change, no matter what. Those are the only three options I can see. And you can perform this exercise with any edition of the Greek New Testament, including any one of the many dozens of Textus Receptus editions. If someone, like White and like me, says that all verses in the NA28 are subject to change based on future finds or theories, what do we mean? Well, imagine a future find like this. What if archaeologists discovered a new and beautiful and very old manuscript of the Greek New Testament? What if it were discovered in Pompeii, deep in a subterranean library that had somehow been completely protected from the ravages of Mount Vesuvius? What if that library and that text contained the whole New Testament, except, of course, for anything that hadn't been written by AD 79, the year Pompey was covered in ash? Most evangelical biblical scholars would say, I think, that this find would have to be considered in the work of New Testament textual criticism. I wouldn't expect any major revelations, any very significant changes. I can't imagine that even a find like this would be able to introduce new, never-before-seen words into the New Testament. But it might lend important support to readings that were difficult to weigh previously. For example, the UBS 5th edition of the Greek New Testament gives a D rating, a low confidence rating, to the reading, "You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition," in Mark 7:9. A large number of manuscripts have "in order to establish your traditions," but quite a few have "in order to keep your traditions." And this isn't a clear difference between Textus Receptus editions and critical texts. Critical editions differ here too. If that special manuscript in Pompey showed support for one option or the other, I bet the tide would turn toward that option. That's what White and I are actually thinking about when we refuse to reject in advance any more evidence that comes our way. This is the kind of thing that has actually happened. For my part, I believe in a Bible doctrine of preservation. I don't think the minor textual variants we actually encounter threaten that doctrine in the least. Development in theory can also affect the Greek New Testament in the future. It promises to do so, certainly, as more volumes of the Editio Critica Maior are released. The coherence-based genealogical method, the CBGM for short, is one example here of a theory that's causing changes to the text. I can say with near certainty that this method has not introduced any new readings into the GNT. It has actually, I'm told, rehabilitated some Byzantine readings, if anything. As scholars work on their theories, others will no doubt arise and gain adherence. This doesn't concern me as long as the New Testament does not include guesses, conjectural emendations. I actually do think that it's a problem that such theories and refinements to theories are potentially endless. But as we'll see in a bit, the only real alternative is for some pope-like figure to come to us with Christ's authority and tell us to stop. A great fiery angel might come and tell Dirk Jonkind, "Your work is at an end. The current edition of the Tyndale House Greek New Testament now perfectly matches the originals, or is close enough." Then we'd be done. No verses would be permitted to change for any reason after that point. Before we get there, however, consider, what if someone says that some of the verses in the Greek New Testament are subject to change based on new finds or theories, but some aren't? Well, that view collapses back into the first view because we have no revealed list of inviolable verses, no flaming angels, no Urim or Thummim, no apostles or prophets to tell us which verses we can touch with textual critical tweaks and which verses we can't. So let me hasten hastily to point out that not many verses actually changed between the King James and the NIV. Many verses did not change at all. And most of the changes, the vast majority of the changes, were incredibly minor, like the presence or absence of the untranslatable preposition men, which in Greek can mean something like "on the other hand." I feel certain that White and I both have a threshold beyond which suggested textual changes are too great, or at least not practically or pastorally wise. The real difference between me and some of the smartest defenders of the Textus Receptus is that they've limited the possible changes by deciding, by fiat, that without God's authority, that only printed editions of the Textus Receptus are allowed to be considered. I just have a bigger pool of Greek New Testament readings to draw from than they do, because I want to be aware of all the readings God has preserved for us, like I said earlier. The first two views I've described are really the same then. So there really are only two positions on the question raised by our friendly King James onlyist in that debate. The only rational alternative to openness to change in principle is no openness to change in principle. In other words, textual absolutism. The only logically consistent alternative to my and White's view is to pick one text and say it's perfect and can't be changed. But such a view is not biblically consistent because the Bible nowhere tells us which manuscripts or editions are perfect or how to find them. TR defenders usually point to God's use of the King James as a kind of divine imprimatur on the Greek text behind it. They love to speak of how the church received the Textus Receptus. This view, as I've mentioned on this channel, runs aground on the obvious fact of the reception of multiple TR editions around the world and over time, including the critical text. Have you ever realized that the critical text is a TR? Here's what I mean. For all the talk that received text advocates give about the power of the church versus the academy to determine which readings are genuine, for all of the value that they give to the reception of given words among God's people, actually, they're rejecting lots and lots of words that were accepted by God's people, that have been received by them at different times around the world. And right now, easily millions of Christians have received critical text Bibles with nary a realization that pointy-headed people like me debate which precise text should be received. Received text advocates are not looking, however, to see what text of the Greek New Testament God's people have received the most often. They're not even defending the Textus Receptus. They're defending one particular edition of it, the one that happens to best match the major historical Bible written in the language of the received text advocates. Empirically, all the people who make the kind of argument our friendly neighborhood King James onlyist is making, they stick with Scrivener's Textus Receptus from 1881, and they never propose, let alone accept, any changes to it. A few of them, on exceedingly rare occasions, tentatively and quietly float the possibility that a few Scrivener readings might not match the original autographs like Revelation 16:5. But I don't know any TR defenders who have ever stated clearly which ones these are and why. I think all King James and TR defense is either on a slippery slope to textual absolutism or is already there at the bottom waiting in the line for the ski lift so they can whoosh down it gleefully once again. I understand why it's upsetting for some Christians to hear that the Greek New Testament used by the ESV or NIV or NASB or CSB translators for their next revision might change. I see why White lost points with some people for refusing to say that there's any particular verse in the Greek New Testament that could not change, no matter what happens in archaeology or textual science. But the alternative, the only alternative, is to step into the role of divine prophet and tell us which edition of the Greek New Testament God wants us to use. And if he hasn't chosen to tell us that himself, I suggest strongly that people stop speaking for him. Instead of demanding that God tell us which Bible text is jot and tittle perfect, can't we just trust God that what he's chosen to do is good? The critical text isn't that different from the TR. See my KJVParallelBible.org site for proof. And even if future finds and theories change the Greek New Testament, God will not turn over his own apple cart or explode his son's bride. I can caution textual critical scholars and urge translators to be very cautious with textual critical changes, but they're picking from among readings God has used and God's people have received in various places and times. And this caution is something they show anyway. That leaves one final part of this question. Are those textual critical scholars actually making advances? This is a little hard for me to say with perfect confidence because I'm a popularizer more than a participant in the work of textual criticism. I do think the CBGM is a genuine advance. It uses computers to make family trees of manuscripts, family trees which then inform text critics. I also think the mere accumulation of textual information and of text critical resources like textual commentaries, including the Net Bible even, I think that's valuable work. I don't know that the work of New Testament textual criticism will ever end until the eschaton, when we all will know even as also we are known. As we wrap, I have a little announcement. I would like to do more with my YouTube channel in the next year, especially in 2025. And I will be able to do so if I can increase my support. Of course, I welcome gifts and memberships at Patreon and YouTube. I put a lot of time and effort into these videos, researching them and then scripting every word. And I've done this pretty well every week for 4.5 years. Wow, the time has gone by fast. I look like such a youngin' in the videos I made early during COVID. But there's a new way to support the channel. If you'd like to support my work, give me work. I don't know if I've ever mentioned it beyond my very first video on this channel, Why Bible Typography Matters. But for many years, I have run a graphic design business on the side, doing websites and logos for churches and other ministries. It's called Forward Design, and I'm ready to take on more of this work. If your church needs a new website, talk to me. And if your church is paying some other company to host their WordPress website, I urge you to go with my hosting instead. Your hosting dollars will support my YouTube work instead of just landing in the coffers at GoDaddy or Flywheel or DreamHost. My pricing is at forwarddesigner.net. That's forwarddesigner.net. And if your church has a problem with its site, you don't have to climb a frustrating phone tree only to end up talking with some poor call center worker who doesn't really understand your English. No, you text or email me personally, and I take care of it. I've done this for many years, and I now have space to handle more churches. I have a special deal going right now. In an effort to get more work, I've knocked $500 off the usual price I charge for new church web designs. That's until the end of 2024. I have 30 open slots for design and hosting jobs in 2025. Or I had them. A few of them have been taken. If I can get those 30 jobs, my plan is to do more with the channel. I'd really like to avoid having sponsors here. I like to be my own sponsor. And then I also get the delight of serving Christ's body, which is why I got into church web design in the first place. I host just over 100 sites right now, almost all of which I design myself. I'd love to serve your church. Go to forwarddesigner.net for more information.